Hi there, Nick Dutch, back on the camera again one more time. One of the refutations, or alleged refutations, when someone says, I've seen a ghost, is you're just crazy, you're just delusional. You haven't seen a ghost, it's not true. Which is really rather interesting and curious in its own right. Yes, there are, so-called tricks of the light. There's ways in which people do apply a certain extra meaning to things which they appear to perceive from time to time. But even then, if the experience fits what culture calls seeing a ghost, then the experience is still could be regarded as being seeing a ghost, whether in fact there was a ghost there or whether there was not a ghost there. It's still an experience. But if the refutation is you're crazy, it did not happen, that's actually a very curious thing to say. I mean, let's say there was a real crazy person, someone properly in a mental home, and they'd first thing in the morning, let's say hypothetically, made themselves a nice cup of tea with milk and sugar, okay? But they cleaned up after themselves after they drunk their cup of tea, and I don't know, they've thrown the cup away, their garbage got collected shortly afterwards, so there was no trace of the cup of tea, and someone else in the canteen had, already filled up the sugar and replaced the tea and replaced the milk, so essentially there was no trace of this whatsoever. And that crazy person who actually had that cup of tea with milk and sugar, a real physical cup of tea with milk and sugar, made in all the normal ways, with water from the kettle and milk from the fridge and tea from the tea caddy and sugar from the sugar bowl, goes to their doctor, and the doctor says, how are you today? How are your symptoms? Okay, you're not doing too badly, that's good. Now, what have you done this morning? And the crazy person might say, well, I got up and I had myself a nice cup of tea with milk and sugar. Now let's say the psychiatrist or the doctor or psychologist or cognitive therapist or whatever it is that they're seeing looks at them suspiciously and says, well, there's no evidence of anyone having had a cup of tea this morning. You're just crazy. You haven't had a cup of tea this morning. Just accept it. You haven't had a cup of tea this morning. You're not telling the truth. There was a trick of the light. And the crazy person will say, no, I had a cup of tea this morning, because they had a real cup of tea, a real physical ordinary cup of tea, made in a normal traditional way, with the milk and with the sugar and from all the normal sources, a real ordinary cup of tea, and they enjoyed it, and the flavor was good. It was sweet, it was milky, it tasted of tea, and it was a cup of tea, and they actually had it. What's going on there? Well, what's going on there is you've got someone who claims that there is no physical evidence or there is no evidence for this cup of tea, and this cup of tea being drunk, and therefore they are saying that this individual did not have a cup of tea. Why do they disbelieve? Well, they disbelieve because the patient has got a label applied to them. The label is that of being crazy. So essentially, near anything that they say could be regarded as being false, just because they're under this label of being crazy. So when someone says, I've seen a ghost, and someone else turns around and says, you're crazy, boom, the label is put in place. It's the same thing, okay? The label is put in place. They're crazy, therefore they can't have seen a ghost. It was a trick of the light, or they were delusional, they've got something wrong with the way in which they're seeing the world. Now let's say the individual in question who has hypothetically seen a ghost. Just, this is just hypothetical, it's just a thought experiment, okay? But they're an ordinary, healthy individual with a good diet, all the right levels of, vitamins and minerals and brain chemicals and serotonin and dopamine, and there's no damage to their brain, and they have a strange experience of a certain type which our culture defines as being seeing a ghost. They've had this experience, they tell someone, and this person that they tell says, you're crazy, boom. Now, one of the things that would happen in the person who's been accused of being crazy is to start to be defensive in one manner or another. And they may choose to be defensive by trying to prove their point of view. Or indeed they may use religion as a justification for what they said. Well, I believe in ghosts, it's my religion. Therefore I can say I've seen a ghost if I want. They will try and find a way of making their position seem socially acceptable, maybe. Curious, isn't it? That people can react in a manner which can affect somebody else's behaviour and distract both parties away from the thing which has actually occurred, namely a strange experience which is defined culturally in a certain way because of the nature and type of experience. It happens all the time, not necessarily just in the example of seeing a ghost or an allegedly or apparently paranormal phenomenon, but it happens all the time in one form or another. And thus the truth can get distorted because of people who are overly skeptical and aggressive with their skepticism. And once a label has been applied, and there are various associations with that label, then anything which is true, which is provided or by the person who has been labelled, can get twisted, disbelieved in, despite the fact it is a hard and fast fact, something which has actually occurred.